I'm going to be reading chapter 2 today of Summer of the Woods, The Virginia Mysteries, which is book 1 in this series, and it's by Stephen K. Smith. Yesterday we read chapter 1, so today we're going to read chapter 2. So if you did not listen to chapter 1, go back and listen to my video from yesterday. Okay? Chapter 2, The Boulder. A boulder is like a really, really, really large rock, so big that you can climb on it. Derek ducked through some small branches and used a stick to pull back a thorn bush that had grabbed his shirt. He had walked up the hill towards a line of pine trees while Sam was fooling around in the water and blabbering about snakes. Derek had seen the really big rock too and discovered that it was, in fact, an enormous boulder. From where he stood, it was the size of a giant dump truck, and it loomed above him as he stood next to its stark shadow. The boulder was covered with moss and leaves on small ledges that jutted here and there up its side. Derek pulled back a group of branches along the boulder, and as he did, noticed something written on the rock. He looked closer and discovered a small plaque that was laid into the side of the stone like a sign. He leaned down and brushed it off with his hands. In large letters was written, Virginia Mining Company, no trespassing. Derek studied the plaque, surprised to see such a sign out in the middle of the woods. He wondered if he should stop, but he decided to keep going. Here's a picture of the plaque that Derek saw on the boulder. Above the ledges in the rock made something like a staircase. Derek put a foot on the nearest crevice and lifted his body up to the first ledge. He reached up for the next step when he felt something grab his ankle. He jumped and turned his head, only to find Sam peering up at him from the ground, his face in a mad expression for being abandoned at the creek. "What are you doing?" Sam demanded. "I wanted to see what's up here," Derek said. "Look what I found in the creek," said Sam. He took the coin out of his pocket and showed it to Derek. "Look how the back of it is different than usual. I think it's old." "Wow, that is pretty cool," replied Derek, studying the coin. "Check out what I found on this boulder." He reached back down and pointed at the plaque. Virginia Mining Company, Sam read again. Mining? What is that, like a gold mine? "I doubt it," said Derek. "We'll have to ask Dad if he knows." "I don't think we should be up here, Derek," warned Sam. "No trespassing means keep out, I think." "Nah, this is really old," said Derek. "We're fine." He proceeded to scramble up the remaining ledges towards the top. "Wait for me!" called Sam as Derek again moved out of sight. It was a tough climb along the edges of the boulder, and there were lots of little holes that might hide a lurking snake. Nonetheless, Sam tentatively followed his brother's path up the rocks and was soon beside him. The top of the boulder was flat and about 20 feet across. Sam looked out across the rock and realized that he could see a very long way. There was a valley ahead of them, and they were above all but the highest trees. It was a beautiful view with the drifting clouds and the deep woods all around. Derek was crouched down on his stomach at the edge of the far end of the rock. "Get down!" he said, and waved his hand at Sam to move back. "What is it?" "Shh!" Derek hissed. He reached into his backpack and retrieved his binoculars. As Derek fumbled with the binocular dials, Sam stretched his neck over the side. He looked down below the boulder and realized that it was much farther down on this side of the rock than on the side that they had climbed up. It was a cliff, maybe 50 feet to the bottom, and would certainly be way too steep to go all the way down. He instinctively scooted back a few inches on the rock so that he wasn't so close to the edge. "Whoa," whispered Derek slowly. "Look at that." "Let me see," said Sam. "What is it?" Derek didn't answer and stayed perched on his elbows, staring through his binoculars. "Let me see," he repeated, and yanked the binoculars away from Derek's hands. "Hey!" said Derek. But Sam already had the binoculars to his eyes and pointed down the cliff. He was just about to ask his brother what the big deal was when he heard a noise below him. He moved his binoculars towards the sound, but he only saw branches. Then, behind the branch, he caught a faint glimpse of something black moving. "What was that?" Sam whispered. "I don't know because you took the binoculars," complained Derek. "Give those to me." He snatched them back. Sam looked back down and saw two boys walking around at the base of the rocks. They looked to be about the same age as he and Derek, maybe a little bit older. They were doing some kind of work around the bottom of the boulder. He pushed a wheelbarrow full of branches, pieces of wood, and other stuff. He took it away from the boulder to spot just a few feet into the trees where it appeared there was a small structure. "Maybe it's a fort," thought Sam. He looked back at the other boy who was still near the boulder. He could see him for a few seconds, but then he disappeared out of sight, only to reappear again. There must be some kind of crevice or cave down there. "Who's that, Derek?" "Shh! I don't know. Be still. I want to move a little closer to see what they're doing." "I think we should get out of here, Derek. What are you going to go? Or where are you going to go?" But Derek didn't answer. He had already begun to hang his left foot over the edge of the rock and was carefully climbing down at an angle to the next ledge where there was a bush that he could hide behind. As he found his footing and brought his other leg down, the silence was suddenly interrupted by a loud beep, beep, beep. The alarm was sounding from the stopwatch hanging from the strap of his backpack. Startled, Derek lost his balance and slipped a couple feet down the slope of the rock until his fall was stopped roughly by the bush. A cascade of loose stones scattered ahead of him down the rock face, and his arm banged hard against the edge of the boulder as he fell. A sharp pain ran through his body. "Derek!" Sam yelled. He stood up to see where his brother had fallen. At the sound of Sam's yell and the watch beeping, the activity at the bottom of the hill stopped, and the other boys turned their heads up towards the peak of the boulder. Derek frantically pressed buttons on the watch to stop the beeping, but it wouldn't stop. He gave up and turned to climb, but as he stood up from behind the bush, he came into full view of the boys below. "Hey, you!" one of the boys shouted. The shout was accompanied by a terrible sounding growl and a huge blur of black fur that Derek only caught a glimpse of. "Bear! Get back here!" the boy shouted and ran towards the side of the boulder and out of sight. The black blur had also vanished, but Derek heard a loud growling that seemed to be getting closer. He quickly made his way back up to where Sam was standing, and the two of them ran up to the front of the boulder. "Come on!" Derek called to his brother as he scampered down the rocks. Sam just stood there, frozen with bulging eyes, thinking of the new boys or a bear that were going to emerge from the rock any second. "Sam, run!" Derek yelled again. He reached up and tugged his brother's arm, practically pulling him down the rock staircase. They tore around the line of trees and down the slope to the creek as fast as they could without tripping over branches and stones. The shouts of their pursuers echoed in the distance, but they didn't dare turn around and look. Instead, they splashed right into the creek, not worrying about finding a stone to leap across and soaking their sneakers and clothes. Sam didn't have time to think about snakes. "Stop!" they heard behind them. But by now, the brothers were stomping through the undergrowth and moving back east along the creek towards home. Sharp branches and leaves smacked them in the face and arms as they hurtled through the brush. Derek could feel his elbow burning from where he banged it against the rock, and Sam had a cramp in his side that made him feel like he was going to throw up. But they didn't stop. They just kept on running. As they neared the part of the creek that ran behind their house, Derek realized that he couldn't hear growling or yelling anymore. He saw the spot where the trees parted and the green grass of their backyard began. They charged up the slope and around to the cover of their front yard. As they jumped up the porch steps, their mom opened the door. The boys nearly knocked her over as they came in, spilling through the threshold, dirty and dripping wet. They started babbling about attackers and bears and nearly being killed, but they weren't making much sense. Mom saw blood on Derek's elbow, and she ordered both of them out onto the deck to take off their wet shoes and clothes while she got some disinfectant and a bandage for his arm. Out of breath, the boys didn't have the strength to argue, so they headed out to the back door and onto the elevated deck. Neither spoke as they sat and removed the muddy shoes that clung to their wet socks like suction cups. Both just stared off into the distance, replaying in their minds what had just happened. They were too astonished to know what to say. Their hearts were still beating fast inside their chests. Sam picked up his shoes and walked over to the railing. He pulled off his wet shirt and hung it over the wood. He felt in his pocket for the coin that he had found in the creek and was glad to see that it was still there. Derek looked down over the yard to where the trail began in the woods and gasped. Sam saw his brother's pale face. "What's wrong?" Derek didn't answer, but when Sam followed his brother's stare into the woods, his heart sank. Under the branches, a few feet into the tree line, loomed a dark shadow and a pair of eyes peering out from the trees. "Okay, come over here, you two. I found the box with the first aid kit," Mom announced triumphantly. Her voice startled them as she opened the back door and walked out on the deck with the antiseptic and bandages in hand. Both boys nearly jumped out of their skin. "Mom!" "Shh!" they shrieked and ducked down behind the railing. "What?" Mom asked, surprised at their panic, and walked over. "Look!" whispered Sam as he peered out from behind his wet shirt hanging on the railing. "Look at what?" said Mom. "By the woods over there," said Sam, pointing towards the trail. But when he peeked up and looked out at the woods to show her, there was nothing there. And that's the end of chapter 2. Tomorrow I will read chapter 3, which is called The Coin. I hope you enjoyed this story. Seems like there's a lot of mystery brewing in this book, so I'm really excited to see what happens next. All right, I'll talk to you later, first graders.